today's live stream. Returning once again as my guest is Karl Davenport, Director of Specialty Chemicals Management Consulting with the ChemQuest Group. Karl and I will have a discussion on project management and why projects that are managed properly have a positive impact on companies and organizations. And now for the live stream. Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to another Build Out live stream. Returning as my guest is Karl Davenport, who actually is also with the ChemQuest Group. Karl, welcome.
Hi, Jim. It's great to be back.
If you could do a favor, if you could cover, last week you talked about your responsibilities with your firm, but if you could also talk about your relationship with ChemQuest Group.
Yes, I became a director for ChemQuest in July of 2020. And if it regards specialty chemicals, then I am facing a client as a ChemQuest director. So outside of specialty chemicals, then I can do work as Project Management Innovations, LLC.
So for those of you who are watching who did not catch the live stream from last Wednesday, Karl and I covered project validation. Very informative live stream. It's also available on replay on LinkedIn. Also on my YouTube channel, you can take a chance and check it out. These two live streams will really work together really well with each other. So what we're going to talk about today is going to be project management. And our first topic that we're going to cover is we're going to talk a little bit about due diligence or project advisory. Now, Karl, you had sent over some really great information for me to take a look at. And the one thing that leaped out to me early in this information was sustainable project management. You know, before we would talk about due diligence and project advisory, what does sustainable project management really mean?
Well, it means that when you are planning to execute your project or you're all in on your project, you're looking at a long-term time frame. The other aspect of sustainability with a lot of the projects that I've been associated with is you're looking at added capacity or business continuity. So you add another facility, you're not planning for it to be there for 1 or 2 years. You're planning it to be there for at least 10 years or even longer. And even a small factory in Ireland I was associated with is still operational and still supplying the customer it was intended to supply. So when you look at project management, it should be for the long term, not the short term.
Very good. And for me, due diligence, you know, it has such a very wide meaning for me. When it comes to project management, you know, the way I view it is that, you know, this is more of a deep dive, really into the deliverables of a project. In your experience, you know, what does due diligence really mean to project management?
Well, I break the total project management into the 3 phases. The first phase is the due diligence, and then the planning, and then the execution. So the reason I created project validation is an early look at what you need to look at within the due diligence immediately if you're serious about your project. So if you went through project validation, the 6 factors, you're ready to go. And from that process, now you have learned maybe where your gaps are. That's where you're going to focus your due diligence. And there's other things that occur within due diligence. Once you've decided to move ahead, you still may not be able to go ahead with your project because your due diligence, it might entail an environmental due diligence, maybe a phase 1 or phase 2. And you're looking at land that you're going to set up your new facility. And if that land's contaminated, then that's going to put a hold on your project. Due diligence could mean a look at intellectual property. In other words, if you're preparing to make an acquisition or a merger, the company that you're acquiring, do they have all the patents necessary? Have they abided by intellectual property rules? And the other thing is you want to get an idea on the margins. How well is that company managing the finances? What about their balance sheet? What about their processes? If you can learn about those and how do they mirror your processes. So, you know, you're looking then at that, where are the similarities, how are you going to consolidate that acquisition? Those are the things that you get into with the deep dive. You've made the decision, you're going to go ahead, and now you want to look at all of those aspects. It could be that maybe things weren't as good, maybe they're a little bit better, but you know your acceptance criteria. So that's the key part of the deep dive into the due diligence is, now that you're going ahead, does everything still meet my acceptance criteria?
So all these initial questions that are being asked, and I know last week when we talked about project validation, we spent some time regarding on return on investment, or ROI.
Yes.
But we also covered the aspect if there's a third parties that are involved. And a really good question came across. When you have investors, when they're looking at obviously at what their definition of ROI is, how is that incorporated into that project charter?
Well, it needs to be done at the earliest stage. So yeah, there's a financial capability that you're looking at. Again, when I say the balance sheet, or you're looking at that potential acquisition, is the synergy of that acquisition, is that going to bring about the revenue that you thought that it was going to bring about? And again, in deep diligence, you're doing a deep dive, looking at the numbers, crunching those numbers all the way down. So yeah, the crucial factors are still in play. You just know where your gaps are, and you are doing a deep dive to make sure you're ready to go ahead.
So in the topic of project advisory, how do you define what project advisory means?
Well, project advisory, that concept is something that would be a co-creation with a client, because just like project validation, all of the factors may not be in play. In due diligence, there might be certain things that the client is really concerned about. So co-creation means, well, okay, if we're going to do a project advisory, depending on the complexity of the project, maybe it takes 4 days, maybe it takes a week. And the other aspect of project advisory, and we'll get into this in the second part of the topic, are those additional resources. Who's the engineering firm? Who's the architectural firm? What about legal? Like if there's aspects on intellectual property, if you need a financial advisor. So you're bringing in those parties, if you don't already have those as a resource within your own company, and you're reflecting on the entirety of the project. So it's all about validating and ensuring you're ready to go ahead, because once you go past the due diligence stage and everything's a green light, you've set up your budgets, you should have the investment ready, and then you're going to commence that project and spend whatever your budget is. It could be a lot of money.
Perfect transition to talk about preparation or planning.
Yes. So actually within the due diligence deliverable is you've established your high level requirements, your acceptance criteria, what I call time to market, which is absolutely crucial. When does the project need to be ready? That could be derived by your customer. It could be your urgency, whatever it is. And typically, the faster you need to complete a project, it's going to be more expensive. So remember, we established that maximum not to exceed budget. If I'm going to max out, then that's going to dictate the timeline for my budget and also my project. So you need to be developing a Gantt chart. So the resource deployment is also in this phase. You should have an architect. You should have a engineering firm. If you don't have those resources within your own company, maybe legal, and then your finance expert, and you're looking at the timeline for that project. And then you make the decision as to, well, this is what I can afford. And am I willing to go ahead at that point to do that? So a Gantt chart should be developed at that point. The Gantt chart should explain the sequence of events, each step of the project until the proposed completion. It should be a visual representation of all the activities happening in parallel, and then identify the crucial steps, milestones, and deadlines for the project. So In doing that, also now you're in the planning phase. That's part of conceptual design. So some of these things are happening in parallel. Your conceptual design is feeding the Gantt chart. It's feeding the potential for your budget. Your cash flow is going to be very important, because as you look at that Gantt chart, when am I going to need the cash available to go ahead with my project? Things in that Gantt chart, which we'll get to as a separate topic alone, are going to be certain pieces of equipment that might be very expensive. So when you place the purchase order for that, then you're going to, you need to know, when am I going to have the money available? And then with that conceptual design and that Gantt chart, you should have enough information to engage a general contractor. So your architectural firm might be built into the general contractor. Sometimes they're not. Maybe the engineering, it's all in one. But if that general contractor is not built in, then they need to be brought in. And all of those parties, it's you, meaning the company, maybe your project leader, the general contractor, the architect, the engineering, the finance. They are looking and basically laying out that Gantt chart, and then that becomes the if you want to say, the Bible for all the next steps that are going to happen.
Very good, very good. And then on the aspect of suppliers and all the inputs and outputs and things like that, how is that also incorporated in the planning?
There's an acronym, SIPOC, for that. So you have suppliers, inputs, outputs. The key thing there that you're deriving is, who are those key suppliers, and what is their lead time? I mean, right now there's so much disruption still due to the pandemic that lead times have gone crazy. So you need to, in your planning phase, you need to establish who's that supplier going to be, who's going to be doing the procurement. In some cases, it might be the company that's placing the purchase order. In another case, it might be the general contractor that's going to place that piece of equipment. But you need to know the lead time. I've even had projects come into question because of LED lighting, and the particular light that we wanted wasn't available. So we had to restructure the plan as to when that light was going to be available. So yes, having an idea on all the materials and the equipment that you're going to need is absolutely crucial. And then where does that fit in with your master plan, your Gantt chart? Very good.
And then another question came in back onto the ROI for investors. When it comes to the project sustainability, would it be very much limited by the ROI for the investors?
Well,
maybe if it's a condition, you think?
Yes. So the ROI could be a condition that decides the time. And you're kind of, it's a double-edged sword. I need the project to be completed by X time to start generating X amount of revenue for ROI. You have to go back to your acceptance criteria and decide, it might mean that you're not going to get the Lamborghini piece of equipment. You're going to have to go with the Chevrolet because it still gets the work to be done. So if you have to go back and look at savings, you should still keep the return on investment in mind with all of your procurement activities that are there. And that could even come down to the general contractor. Who's the contractor that's going to handle it? What are their capabilities as far as managing their budget? Do they have experience with these size of projects? Are they known in the jurisdiction where you're going to do the project? So, and it's not any project, you should never take anything for granted, but it might be easier for that general contractor, or they have more experience and knowledge to really decide and help you with the budget and the timing.
Yeah, and I would say that 2020 and now into 2021, with what's currently going on within global markets and industries, obviously related to project management, this is stuff that, if you started your project a couple of years ago, you probably never anticipated. But also today, if you're launching new projects, this is something that you have to take an accounting to. To throw another acronym out there for you, I wrote down responsibilities, accountability, consulted, and informed. I think I got that from some notes that you had. Would you like to cover that as well?
Sure, RACI. Well, there's two things built into that. One would be the RMP, the risk management plan. So the risk management plan, a mitigation plan in that could be your ROI for the project. But typically, any crucial factor within the project or potential showstopper, there needs to be a mitigation plan for that risk. So you should know what those are. All of that or any of those activities should be communicated to all the stakeholders. There should be accountability set up for your consultants, whether it's the architect, engineer, general contractor. They have accountability to make sure that they will come through on that risk. So when you've done your stakeholder analysis, and this might include your customer, but most likely as it concerns the planning part of the project, you're dealing with all of your internal personnel, any crucial stakeholder, anyone within the operation, anyone connected with the project. So the responsibility is who's accountable for what, what's the pecking order, and the accountability then is built into what they're doing for the project. And then the consulted. So in other words, in my communication plan, which might be, let's say it's a weekly email. If it's really important, it should be, of course, immediate. But there's a regular communication, whatever the time interval for that has been set up, and then I'm regularly communicating the status of the project. The other most important thing of RACI is change control. So I'm going to anticipate I may have some changes. Maybe that's coming out of my risk management plan. When I get to a certain spot in my project, I'm going to have to make a decision to go with either A, B, C. Maybe it's the light example that I provided. Well, who as it regards the project has the authority to recommend a change? Who has the authority to make the change? And then how is the change then incorporated into the project so that all of those key stakeholders are aware of it? So that ties back into the procurement, whether it's your company that's placing the purchase order or whether it comes from the general contractor, wherever it's coming from. So you have a process that all parties have agreed to, they've all bought into for change control.
In preparing for our conversation, I did a lot of research, and you can search the term, obviously, of project management. It was amazing to see the amount of information I was finding, and also, too, that we're currently in a middle, probably more towards getting to the middle, if not quite there yet, of a transition that's happening from traditional businesses, business models and organizational models, where now we're looking at really having more smaller projects laid out, defined out, and mapped out, but also having employees that will cover different projects, and they become more involved in the decision process on let's say executive level type of decisions. And in that process, I came across a Harvard Business Review article, and I'm going to play a video here, but I'll make sure that in the replay I link to the article, and then also to my YouTube channel. Make sure in the video description I have a link to it as well. But check this out, and I highly recommend people to take a look and just search under the terms of project management. It's amazing some of the things that are going on and the information you can get regarding the topic we're covering today. I hope that you are finding today's discussion on project management both informative and valuable. In preparing for this stream, I came across a great article published on May 10th in the Harvard Business Review titled, "How Project Managers Can Stay Relevant in Agile Organizations." In the article, Jeff Gothelf covers how large and small companies and organizations are increasingly moving to project management oversight by smaller teams that are focused on outcomes versus output. This focus centers on collecting evidence and making real-time prioritization decisions to determine next steps as opposed to solidly sticking to a predefined plan. Jeff also offers 3 recommendations for project management professionals to follow that keeps them relevant and effective in an increasingly agile business world. Number 1, understand the goals in your company or organization. Now, in addition to understanding all the goals, don't be afraid to inquire or push back on leadership and stakeholders to arrive at best understandings of goals and define what success is. Number 2, rethink your success matrix. Agile project managers need to focus on metrics such as cycle time. And number 3, continuously inspect and adapt your ways of working. Now, project managers gain knowledge through evidence-based pursuits. You can read this full article by using the link posted on the replay of this stream and in the recording on my YouTube channel. Okay, now back to my discussion with Karl Davenport. So, Karl, in that article, it talks about how organizations and companies are really changing, and they're looking for those agile employees who will be able to really manage smaller projects, but also obviously help to the future of the company when it comes to making business decisions, when it comes to new markets, new products, new services, and things like that. Anything else that you'd want to add to, regarding this move to being more project management to create agile organizations and companies?
Well, I'm supportive of that type of active management. And even in projects I've worked on in the past, we've had the engineering, even the laboratory team, help us with the conceptual design. So there wasn't an engineer involved yet, but we might have done that process with an architect and designed where everything was going to be, and then provided it to the engineer and said, hey, this is what we want. So there should be a lot of flexibility built in. And that accountability matrix that I talked about should encourage that kind of level of communication, because it could even be an operator on the floor to say, hey, I see what you guys are thinking about doing, and it might need a change. And then that communication can then, get to the right person to make sure that change happens.
So before we get into our final topic, which is execution, another very interesting post here, regarding market conditions. As it says, fast track or delay a project since it might affect the ROI. How is a decision of delaying or fast tracking a project taken by the change management process?
Well, I would consider it this way: if you have room within your not to exceed budget. I mean, you don't want to needlessly spend money that's not necessary. But if you have the funds available to fast track your project, then you get it done. And, if you don't have the funds to fast track the project, and, then you're in the due diligence phase and that, then it might be even better to wait, until the market conditions are there to where you can, you're going to sustain that ROI. So in other words, don't go ahead. But that is hopefully something that you can get a clear understanding on before you've started your project.
So as we look at execution related to project management, there are several steps that you do cover that you've talked about. And obviously the first one is looking at a submittal and a plan check. Would you want to go through some of those steps regarding execution? Because this is one of the most critical steps within a project itself.
They're all critical. The first thing is to know that you're ready to submit. So the company has to provide all of the internal company approvals, the capital plan, the Gantt charts ready to go. Equipment procurement plans ready, peer review if you have a landlord. And then the other aspect then is the consultant or your architect or engineering firm. They've prepared all of the files, the CAD files, PDF files are ready. Engineering, mechanical, electrical, structural, whatever, all of those plans are ready to go, and they're prepared to be submitted to the jurisdiction. And then the general contractor, they have the P&IDs, they have cut sheets, they have everything ready to go when they're going to have to place the purchase order. And it's very important that you know where you're going to submit, because each different, what I call a jurisdiction, which could be a city, could be a county, could even be a country, is going to have a specific condition on how they want those plans submitted. And then there's a timeline. Once you submit the plans, they may come back with questions. It might be the city asking about a code. It could be the fire department. It could be environmental or some other. So at that point, when you've submitted, then the timeline is going. You should anticipate the number of plan checks to prepare. So it's rare that a project goes in. It does happen where there's not a plan check. It just goes through and it's approved. Normally there's questions and then there's a timeline on that. So you need to know that timeline before you submit. It's built into your Gantt chart. And then that critical material procurement, if you know that you're going to go ahead and, today with the long lead time, you may have to provide that PO earlier. So construction stewardship, if you've hired the right general contractor, that should go ahead. Inspections, which is going to happen with the city. Just briefly, when the inspections occur, if you did your due diligence or project validation that you can still operate with your occupancy permit, then you're going to be good. If they come in and inspect and you're operating, that could be a problem. And then, of course, commissioning. So you should have a plan on your Gantt chart to go all the way through commissioning. And that could be part of risk management and mitigation, because if you're transferring product from one location A to location B, you got to make sure that B is up and ready to go before you pull the plug on A. So absolutely important. So, all that planning that you've put in, the key things on the execution phase is the plan submittal, making sure that that's going to be properly done. There should only be one entity that's answering these questions on plan submittal. And then within the execution, your change control. And you should know that there's probably going to be changes. If you have a robust process for dealing with the changes, then you're going to be good.
Well, as we all learned over the last year and a half or however long it's been, expect the unexpected.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we really look at what we've covered, obviously this afternoon, is some of the benefits is really, your project hopefully is completed on time, within budget, positive team member experiences, leadership and stakeholders, investors are comfortable with the overall project, and it's what it delivered for the company and for the organization. In closing out our conversation here on project management, Karl, is there anything that we did not cover that you would want to leave with the viewers?
Well, the last thing that I would want to say, all of those attributes that you described, the teamwork that's involved, the collaboration with all of the persons involved in the project, remember that the project is almost always going to be done for the customer. Mm-hmm. So if you handle the project management phases properly, then it's transparent to the customer. And there should be no pain, only gain for the customer.
No pain, only gain. I like that. That's a one takeaway for today. So, Karl, this is amazing because you're with the ChemQuest Group. You work with the ChemQuest Group. Next Wednesday, Edie Fox Abrams from the ChemQuest Group will be joining me for Wednesdays, June 9th at noon Eastern Daylight Time. We're going to talk about key skills for business development professionals. So make sure that everyone look for the post on that and make sure that you do participate. So we're going to start getting into some other topics. Karl, I appreciate having you last week and having you this week. And I'm sure you and I are probably going to have some additional streams together because what you provide to the different industries is very relevant, very important, and it's very critical today, especially with all these transitions going on for the business models for organizations and companies related to project management.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I look forward to the next podcast.
Excellent, excellent. Everyone have a great day, and Karl, you have a great day as well.
Thank you.